cannot give you any opinions about performance versus debate. I feel like I could get in trouble as a TA for doing that, but I do have strong opinions. Karina, are you ready to start?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that okay if she places the timer here as well? Is the House ready? This House regards the dominance of the fossil fuel economy. For the purposes of this debate, we will be discussing the regard of the dominance of the fossil fuel economy in the United States and the world, allowing to define our claim of value. Dominance is the fact of being more important, powerful, or easy to notice than somebody or something else. Our source is the Oxford Learning Dictionaries. We regard the dominance of the fossil fuel economy because we have doomed future generations. To elaborate, fossil fuels are used for over 80% of energy in the United States. Fossil fuels are a non-renewable resource which we are depleting at an alarming rate. At this point in our society, there is no replacement to make up for the deficiency of energy when fossil fuels run out. That is the problem that will occur due to the dominance of the fossil fuel economy. We as a society have failed to develop sufficient harvesting and distribution methods for renewable energy resources. To define regret, a sad feeling because of something that has happened or something that will have been done or has been done. As to define climate change is a change in the global or regional climate patterns, in particular a change to an inherent from the mid to late 20th century onwards, attributed largely to increased levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide produced by the use of fossil fuels. Our source is also the Oxford Dictionary. In case you're unaware of the current state of our surroundings, allow me to enlighten you about how the dominance of the fossil fuel economy is affecting and will continue to affect our lives in the States. Also, the definition for a fossil fuel economy is that an economy of self-sustaining growth predicted on the growing consumption of fossil fuels and therefore generating a sustained growth in emissions of carbon dioxide. This House will use the recently released IPCC report for the following information. The weather impact, according to the climate change hazards, adversely affected the well-being of North American populations and posed a substantial risk to the natural, managed, and human systems which they depend on. Even if global warming is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius, human life, safety, and livelihoods across North America, especially in coastal areas, will be placed at risk from sea levels, rising severe storms such as hurricanes. For food impact, climate-included redistribution and declines in North American food productions are at risk to food and nutritional security. Climate change will continue to affect the North American agricultural and fisheries sustainability ranges and intensify production losses and key crops, livestock, fisheries, and aquaculture products. For water impact, heavy exploitation of limited water supplies, especially in the western U.S. and northern Mexico, are deteriorating freshwater management infrastructure and heightened water insecurities and risks. Intensified droughts and earlier runoff due to the changes in the weather, all that fun stuff, has impacted snowpacks and will increase water scarcity during the summer peaks for water demand period, especially in the regions of extreme integrated agriculture, leading to economic loss and increased pressure of limited groundwater as a substitute for diminished water supplies. The ecosystem impact is that rising air, water, ocean, and ground temperatures have reconstructed ecosystems and contributed to documented redistributions and mortality of plants, fish, birds, mammals, and other faunal species. Climate-driven changes are particularly pronounced in the Arctic ecosystems. Escalating climate change impacts on marine, fish, freshwater, and terrestrial ecosystems will alter ecological processes and amplify the anthropogenic threats protected and iconic species and habitats. For city and settlement impacts, North American cities and settlements have been affected by increasing severity and frequency of climate-induced hazards and extreme events, which have contributed to the cascading effects of infrastructure damage, loss of services, and economic activity damage, and heritage resources, safety concerns, and redistributed livelihoods. Impacts are particularly apparent for Indigenous peoples for whom their culture, identity, and commerce, health, and well-being are closely impacted and connected to the resilience of the environment. Coastal ravines and urban flooding affecting communities and ecosystems will become a dominant risk for urban centers and displacing people, compromising economic activity, disrupting transportation, trade, infrastructure. Large wildfires will increasingly endanger lives and livelihoods, mental and physical health, property, key infrastructure, and economic activities that will contribute to the compromised air quality and municipal water contamination to the human life. The The health impact is that climate change has negatively affected human health, well-being in North America, and high temperatures have increased mortality and morbidity with the severity of impacts influenced by age, gender, location, and socioeconomic conditions. Health risks are projected to increase in the century under all future emission scenarios, and the magnitude of severity and impacts depend on the implementations of effectiveness. For economic impact, the extreme events in the climate hazard adversely have multiple effects on the economy in North America that have distributed through the supply chain, infrastructure, and trade. Under current economic and consumption trends, paradigms and climate change are directly impacted into our economy and just have caused large market and non-market damages across North America. To clarify, this House does not regret
Time.
Thank you.
Is anyone not ready? We negate the following. Resolved, this House regrets the dominance of the fossil fuel economy. First, we're going to provide a definition. The Cambridge Dictionary defines regret as to feel sorry about a situation, especially something sad or wrong or a mistake that you made. Contention 1, big economies were built on fossil fuels economies. Fossil fuels are the lifeblood of every first world country's economy. According to the American Petroleum Institute, the oil and natural gas are responsible for 9.8 million jobs currently in the U.S. That's 5.6% of all U.S. jobs. According to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management in 2020, the offshore oil and gas industry supported 176,000 jobs in the United States, translating to $11.9 billion in labor income and $20.6 billion worth of contribution to the GDP and $38.1 billion in output. Offshore rigs also bring spendable money into the local market, and as a result, this helps small businesses grow. It is also important to note that, just like the first world countries, developing countries are heavily intertwined with the fossil fuel industry. In an article for the UN Chronicle, Scott Foster and Debate-a-palooza say that many developing countries have large untapped fossil fuel resources that they intend to use to develop their respective economies. This can be further seen on carbontracker.com, where the percentage of the country's revenue from fossil fuels is shown. And according to their Carbon Tracker's data, 5 countries that rely on fossil fuels for more than half of their revenue have a population of 10 to 50 million people. Fossil fuels don't just outshine renewables in jobs, but also outshine them in pay. Neil DeHensey notes in his Vox.com article, Dirty Energy Pays More Than Clean Energy, that a 2021 study from the Political Research Institute at the University of Massachusetts Amherst shows that the average salary of a clean energy worker in California is about $86,000, and a fossil fuel worker is around $130,000. The thing that we must emphasize most is that fossil fuels can be linked to nearly every part of the economy and people's everyday life. In their article, Why is Oil Important?, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management says that oil is used to create diesel, to fuel trucks, trains, boats, and barges, and even heating oil for homes. The Bureau also says that non-fuel oil is used to make clothes, phones, hygiene products, toys, and outdoor gear. It's not just home goods and fuels that fossil fuels are good for, they're also being used to help build the things that produce renewable energy. Polyfluoro Limited is a global leader in the field of engineering plastics, and according to their article, Polymers in Renewable, the rising high-performance plastics in renewable energy, you can find plastic polymers in solar tracker bearing for wind turbines, EV charging stations, battery receptors, and waste polymers are now able to be converted back into combustible fuels. Megan Rowling for Reuters wrote an article in October of last year which showed that there were 12 million jobs available in renewable energy. Those jobs wouldn't exist without fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are the lifeblood of the economy. Contention 2, we cannot regret the dominance of the fossil fuel economy because of the advancements it has contributed to. But over time we have found detrimentals of fossil fuels. They are the reason that humanity has made so many advancements that have not just helped humanity's way of life, but also saved and protected many. Most pharmaceutical drugs are made via chemical reactions that involve the organic molecules. Petroleum is a plentiful source of organic molecules that feed into the drug synthesis process. Some sources cite as much as 99% of pharmaceutical feedstocks in regions are coming from petrochemical sources. Medicines such as aspirin are made from petrochemicals. Military operations, which include moving troops and carrying out missions, account for 70% of the U.S.'s military energy consumption. Just one of the military jets, the B-52 Strandfortress, consumes about as much fuel in the hour as an average car driver uses in 7 years. Contention 3, fossil fuels are necessary to make the shift for a more sustainable economy. We concede that fossil fuels are not sustainable and will not sustain our economy for much longer. However, we must recognize that fossil fuels and the current economy dominated by such is necessary to make the transition into a cleaner, more sustainable economy. Robert Raper of Forbes magazine says almost 4 million people die from household air pollution every year. This is due to unsafe cooking practices in third world countries. We propose the access to clean cooking using liquefied petroleum gas, aka LPGs. They are a byproduct produced in natural gas processing, and if it is used as we are proposing, it will be flared, and if it is not used as we are proposing, it will be flared and completely wasted. If we establish this type of energy in third world countries, not only will it provide for much cleaner cooking processes, but it would also use a resource that would otherwise go to waste. And if we establish this form of energy production, then we can hopefully shift into a cleaner energy production using this byproduct from fossil fuels. And then carbon capture and storage technology provide for an easy transition. And in this complex technology, it reduces the amount of CO2 being limited.
Time. We have 2 minutes for cross-examination between the first speakers.
Do you want to just sit down? Do you want to stand?
We can sit if you'd like.
Okay, because I don't want to just like be yelling over each other.
No, that's fair.
Okay.
Would you like the first question?
If you have one, you can go on.
Going to your last argument that you mentioned, if it would create cleaner fossil fuels, do you think that they would be able to make the adjustments with enough time to not effectively save our environment, but to help our environment?
So
the
like,
turnover would be quick enough.
yeah, so if, like when we're talking about like transitioning from like a fossil fuel economy to a cleaner, more sustainable economy, like no matter what we do, it's like we have to act now or it's going to be too late. And so like turnover rates, it's
we're
like
hypothesizing by 2030 is
yeah, and so like no matter like what we're doing, like it's going to take a long time. So if we start doing that now, we can work, and it's all going to be. No one's going to really prioritize third world countries to begin with. Like that's just not going to happen. And so like their energy production isn't as great as like a first world country. So if we like focus on that, hopefully we can like increase that turnover rate in the third world countries, while also like focusing a lot of that energy into first world countries.
If we had done it before now, do you think that we wouldn't be in the position we are now?
If
If we had created this cleaner version of fossil fuels before now, if we made it a priority before today, before this month, before this year, would we be in the same position that we're in now? If we did it in the 80s, if we did it in the 70s?
For sure, but like we didn't have the research and we didn't have the knowledge of like how detrimental like these fossil fuels were to our environment. So like we can't say like, oh, like it would have been great if we did that sooner. We can't say that because we didn't really know, and it's not productive to like the debate that we're having right now to be like talking about like decisions made in the past, because like at the end of the day, like we're stuck in the position we are right now.
Right, but our debate's over the past. It's about regretting the past and the creation of the dominance of the fossil fuel economy. And according to our research, we did know about it in the past. We just chose to neglect it and not do anything about it because the production of fossil fuels was such a lucrative business. So we just decided to turn a blind eye to it. If we had not done that in the past,
I think that
we
kind
would
of
have
dives
better.
into more of the debate of like corruption within government rather than what we're really talking
Time.
about here.
Okay. 5 minutes for ready when
Is the
you're
house ready? I would like to begin by restating our debate is one of value. I shall continue under the previous definition stated by Colonel. I would also like to point out that the other side did state that if we had responded sooner, we would most likely have seen a better future. It is also important to note that we do not deny the fact that fossil fuels have benefited us, but that the over-reliance in the dominant state of fossil fuels has come with significant repercussions that have caused us to not be able to respond due to a lack of development in other researches such as fossil fuels. Climate change is the biggest negative impact we see come from the dominance of the fossil fuel economy. To reiterate, climate change is defined as a change in global or regional climate patterns, in particular, a change inherent from the mid to late 20th century onward and attributed largely to the increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide from the Oxford Dictionary. Before we discuss the way the fossil fuel economy stares into not only fulfilling ecosystem, food and water quality degradation, and what will be an overall falling human quality of life, it's important to note that the dominance of the fossil fuel economy on climate change is not a new discovery. Swedish scientist Svante Arrhenius and Nobel laureate in 1896 calculated that the temperature of the Arctic region would rise by 8 or 9 degrees Celsius if carbon dioxide increased by 2.5 times. Niels Ecklehem, a Swedish meteorologist, writing in 1901, stated the present burning of pit coal is so great that if it continues, it must undoubtedly cause a very obvious rise in the mean temperature of the earth. That's sourced from the conversation. In 1912, numerous newspaper articles were released expressing the negative impact of coal on fossil fuels and the climate. That was sourced from the USA Today. We as a society have failed to transition from a dominant fossil fuel economy to a sustainable economy, and as a result, the global temperature has continued to rise at a rapid pace, which has forced us into the current ceremonies now with terrifying future. To summarize the points that I have made thus far, coal and fossil fuels have had a negative impact on the earth for over a century, and we have knowingly continued to let the fossil fuel economy dominate our society and lead us to a regretful destruction of our own making. The excessive usage of fossil fuel and thus the abundant amount of carbon emissions in our atmosphere has led to the increased number of threats toward our planet and inhabitants. The first step that I will be discussing is the collapsing ecosystem in our marine life that we have seen thus far and expect to see in any dominating fossil fuel economy. Our over-reliance on fossil fuels such as oil and coal has caused the climate to increase in our atmosphere to the point that ocean life are being affected. Recent evidence suggests plankton, which generates around 80% of the world's oxygen and are the basis of most marine ecosystems, will be at risk of catastrophic decline as carbon emissions from excessive burning of fossil fuels continue, sourced from the scientific area. This would ultimately cause not only an even faster decline of marine species, but also an incomprehensible amount of damage due to the millions of people who rely on marine life for food or job purposes. A report done in 2019 states that 99% of tropical corals are projected to be lost if the global average temperature rises by 2 degrees Celsius per year nature. Now in 2020, we are on the course of 4 degrees Celsius of heating, according to renowned scientist Joan Rockström. According to the National Center of Climate Restoration, the Great Barrier Reef, the largest living structure on Earth, is in a death spiral at the current level of global warming. It is expected to bleach on average every 3 to 4 years, whereas recovery takes a decade or more. Coral reefs are the home to thousands of species of marine life and play a major life in the reduction of erosion. Increasing erosion will lead to human displacement and a decrease in water quality. That's sourced from the National Ocean Services. We are also expected to see a rise in sea levels increasing more than 10 meters, with around 600 million people living below the 10-meter mark and a third of the world occupying coastal communities. This can only be seen as a reality to an immense genocide, as scientists rebellion. The regretful dominance of the fossil fuel economy not only destroys more than 71% of our planet and marine life, our habitable land is negatively impacted as well. Due to the fact that warmer air can hold more water, meaning that places that are normally dry will be expected to experience even harsher droughts. Warmer climates lead to drier soil, which also aids in the reduction of waterfall. Lack of rain, however, is not the only concern in the land. In fact, we see increasing heat waves. In 2019, more than 230 attribution studies across the world found that 95% of heat waves were made more likely or worse due to climate change, sourced from the Lancet. In 2017, 157 million people worldwide were exposed to heat waves, and over 153 hours were reported lost due to hotter weather conditions, the American Public Health Association. Jobs with heavy emphasis on manual labor and the increasing hotter weather conditions become much more strenuous with the added effect of heat waves. The severity of the impacts of heat waves would be far less had we expanded beyond the dominating fossil fuel economy when the issue was first brought to light. Before 1970, our ecological footprint was less than the rate of Earth's regeneration. After the Industrial Revolution, however, we overused 50% of the Earth's biocapacity. This caused not only an average of 65% decrease in the populations of mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and fish, it also threatens food security, which I will address further. 124 million people across 51 countries and territories are already facing crisis level of acute food insecurity or worse due to climate change. Thank you.
Can we take 1 minute of prep time, please?
Yeah.
first like to start speaking about how our definition of regret. Our definition of regret says that our definition of regret states that we feel sorry for a situation, especially something that we're sad, wrong, or mistake that we have made. Our opposition has said that if in the past we had known that if fossil fuels have the effect that they have today we would have done. We should have done so sooner in the past, for it's a regret that we have today. That was not what we said during the crossfire. What we have said was that there was nothing we could have done at the time for learning the limits of fossil fuels. We had not done enough research. We didn't have enough technologies to start doing the movements that we can today. All the companies that are building towards reusable sources to help the climate change are working towards it now because we only now have the technology towards that future. Also, they have talked. Our opposition has often talked about how the effects they have in the future on the fisheries, on the human health, but they have not talked about our first contention. Our first contention is how we do not have the money, we do not have the resources towards moving to towards healthier and more reusable energy. Even though we have a lot more jobs with reusable energies, they do not give enough energy toward that we can fulfill our energy needs right now. The very best solar cells, for example, which are one of the most widely known or seen as a future of reusable energy, can only give 40% of the total solar energy that we accumulate. When you factor what the materials needed towards the solar energy, the solar power is not anywhere near being able to be used for compared to fossil fuels. Additionally, the materials needed to create fossil fuels, including some of the chemicals, are highly toxic when being dug up, which are nearly, if not more, toxic than actual fossil fuels, which can affect way more health in the environment than fossil fuels do today. Including that, when it comes to the economy and how it affects the everyday person, the average compensation for clean energy worker in California is about $86,000. For a fossil fuel worker, that's $130,000. That's how much money difference it can make on a first world country. Jumping from one salary to the other would have a lot of harm to our society today, as we're not prepared for that kind of jump. Every day today, people are working from paycheck. If we include that with transportation needs, just here in Dallas, an average person can drive up to 100 miles a day. We do not have the necessities to be able to do that kind of stuff, including that, just talking about driving. Just to be able to create electric cars, it's very detrimental because even though you can reuse them over and over again, whenever you're done for a car, you have to recycle. The requirements to recycle a car are very dangerous. For every battery, for an electric car, every battery can be different, and it includes very harmful toxins that if it's wrongly reusable, if it's wrongly recyclable, it can even spread toxins and other kinds of chemicals on the earth and harm it way more than a gas engine can do on a fossil fuel run car. Furthermore, there's a lot of energy efficiency problems and that can hurt the environment if we use reusable sources on today. For example, a hydroelectric dam can be, if it's not efficiently run, can seriously hurt an ecosystem because it suddenly floods an environment and it creates a lot of damage. Plus, if it's wrongly created, it can even break and flood the area that was previously affected.
Time. Now we have a 2-minute.
Would you like me to stand as well?
If you want to.
Would it make you more comfortable?
I'm fine, it's just.
Okay, I'll sit. I'm having trouble sitting, I'm so sorry. You can have the first question.
That's better if you want to ask first.
Okay, my first question is gonna be, what is your source for renewable resources harming the ecosystem more than fossil fuels will, and how, what is your source for that?
Can you repeat the question, please?
When you were talking about how renewable resources harm the ecosystem more than fossil fuels, what was your source for that?
There's a paper written by Dr. Somas on 2019. He's a British award-winning mechanical engineer and fluid dentist. And when he talked about the health injuries the health problems that are created by fossil fuels, do you consider that they also are the ones who created most of the medicines today, and the items that were used on today's medicines to be able to save hundreds of millions of people?
We're not stating that fossil fuels weren't used in any beneficial way, or that they have not helped.
But we are talking about
You're not stating that fossil fuels haven't helped us at all. We are talking about how the regret of a dominant fossil fuel economy. The fact that we have over-relied on fossil fuels, and now we are in this specific state that we are in, and it's leading us to like a terrible Earth system that we've talked about, or the destruction of our ecosystem. It's the fact that it was over-relied on and dominated, and we haven't expanded past that.
But we needed to use it because of the population boom. There was a big population
over-reliance on.
There was a big
over-reliance.
Of course, there was an over-reliance. We didn't have the technology needed to not rely on it.
I'm answering your question though. I'm stating that we understand that there are benefits, but the over-reliance in the past of fossil fuels has gotten us to the point now that we have no other solution for our future failing economy.
Are you guys ready? To continue with what Karma said, 124 million people across 51 countries and territories are already facing crisis levels of acute food insecurity or worse due to the potential of global food shortages. It is exceedingly high due to the high carbon emissions as a result of the dominant fossil fuel community that we see today. Rising temperatures over the past 30 years have already led to the decline in the capability of many global cereal crops to deliver full yields. And with the continuation of the dominant fossil fuel economy, we can expect to see shorter life cycles resulting in smaller plants, shorter reproductive duration, and lower yield potential. With less than 25% of total crop land producing more than 70% of maize, wheat, and rice, only a small percentage of regions will have to experience a heat wave before we see global food failures. A predicted 3 degrees Celsius warming of global average expect drought duration to last around 10 months. This is according to the Scientists Rebellion. I'd also like to move on to companies' immortality. Since 1970, CO2 emissions have increased by 90%, with emissions from fossil fuel combustion and industrial processes contributing about 78% of the total greenhouse gas emissions increase from 1970 to 2011. This is stated by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. As we stated before the knowledge that a dominant fossil fuel economy would lead to climate change, it is not new information. The immortality that fossil fuel companies as well as policymakers have shown and continue to show with prioritization of the short-run economy under fossil fuels, and they would rather the lives of future generations and many of us today suffer the consequences and shall remain stagnant. In 1988, Shell reports conducted
a story titled The Greenhouse Effect, and stated, mainly due to the fossil fuel burning and deforestation, the atmospheric CO2 concentration has decreased some 15% in the present century. The potential implications for the world are, however, so large that the policy options need to be considered much earlier, and the energy industry needs to consider how it should play its part. We have been aware of the sheer consequences of allowing fossil fuel organizations to continue to grow and dominate our economy, and yet for the past 30 years I've continued to let it be. Our failure to steer away from a dominant fossil fuel economy is nothing new. In 1989, United States Nations Foundation claimed that policymakers were alerted to the irrefutable connection between man-made global warming and the impacts on our climate, and urged cutting greenhouse gas emissions and working to manage and litigate their impacts. Since then, there have been over 60 congressional meetings regarding climate change and limitations on carbon emissions, all amounting to what we have today. A major reason for this being that many fossil fuel companies have allowed for the continuous spread of misinformation that has cultivated in our societies and paints a story of innocence. This is all coming from the conversation, and in 1989, the formation of the Global Climate Coalition said that ExxonMobil and the American Petroleum Institute created a response to the global position and said that global warming was real, but that it could be part of a natural warming trend. From a moral standpoint, ExxonMobil is one of the largest manufacturers of gas and oil, and it used its access to the Bush administration to block federal policies and shape government communication on global warming, as quoted from the Union of Concerned Scientists. Furthermore, we want to elaborate more on human displacement, and the NRDC.org states that unearthing, processing, and moving underground oil, gas, and coal deposits takes an enormous toll on our landscapes and ecosystems. The fossil fuel industry leases stretches of land for infrastructure such as wells, pipelines, access roads, as well as facilities for processing, waste storage, and waste disposal. In the case of stripe mining, entire swaths of terrain, including forests and whole mountaintops, are scraped and blasted away to expose underground coal or oil. Even after Operation Seize, the nutrient leach land will never return to what it once was. Not only does this decrease the amount of land for people, but also critical wildlife habitat. Land crucial for breeding and migration ends up fragmented and destroyed. Even animals able to leave can end up suffering, and they're often forced into less than ideal habitats and must compete with existing wildlife for resources. At this point, if we were to turn to renewable sources, it would come at a costly price. There would also be negative impacts due to the fact that we have not spent enough time and effort to developing these resources in time when we first realized our regret of dominance and the fossil fuel economy. There are
Time.
We want to take another minute up front, please. And then we have like representatives like alternative options, but it feels like a way that we can still use fossil fuels to transition.
The first thing I'd like to talk about is East Texas. East Texas, just a few years ago during the pandemic, lost 105 jobs in one coal plant alone. I haven't heard an answer yet as to how renewable jobs are going to transition quickly and efficiently if they're going to replace these jobs, replace coal oil, all these fossil fuel jobs immediately. I personally know people who work in that industry that will be affected. They need to know how they're going to pay their bills, take care of families, take care of loved ones. This is a personal thing that I know is horrible to go through when you talk about losing jobs in this industry. And it's not just East Texas that is losing jobs when it comes to the pandemic for fossil fuels if you shut these things down quickly and immediately. It's also people in Canada. When you talk about the pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline, Justin Trudeau said they were to lose thousands of jobs when that was shut down. That's $1 billion industry being shut down. And I'd also like to talk about the fact that you said we're debating the past. If we are debating the past, climate change can be dated all the way back to the start of agriculture when human beings started agriculture. As John Green puts in his historic video talking about the start of human civilization, historians have noted that's when climate change started. We went from being hunter-gatherers to chopping down trees, bulldozing different kinds of grass and everything, and completely changing our environments around us. That was the start of climate change, not the 1800s. It was the beginning of civilization. That's when climate change started. And then I'd also like to note that when you talk about medicine, we need medicine. You can't just ignore the fact that the dominance of fossil fuels led to the start of things like soap. It brought us things that were incredibly important. Syringes, all these things. This can be noted on the BOEM homepage. MSI pipeline. There's a million different sources I can bring up just to point that out. Syringes. We had a pandemic this last year. Did you get a COVID shot? I did. I got 2 of them, or 3. I forget. But if you got one, you can thank plastic. And if you want more efficient drilling, well, we can thank the source here. As Emma brought up, we have these different plastic goods that make drilling more efficient, right? And that leads to 100% reduction. That can lead to 100% reduction in carbon being released during the production of during the drilling process. And then on the back to the note, when we talk about jobs and salary is a big part of this. As noted earlier, jobs pay more when it comes to dirty jobs. And when we're talking about taking care of families and such, these jobs need to be paid well. There's a discrepancy of close to $30,000 just in California when it comes to renewable jobs versus dirty jobs. And that can be noted in a Vox.com article by Neil Dinesha. I'd also like to point out that renewable sources are not as efficient as claimed, and they are more expensive than has been noted by our opponents over here. And as Dr. Samora puts it, she is an award-winning engineer in fluid dynamics. She points out that 1, nuclear energy, it isn't incredibly safe. 2, all these things like solar energy, they cost a lot of money. They haven't pointed out quartz, which is needed in order to make solar panels. It's a dangerous thing. It's terrible for the environment to mine. It also takes plastic parts to make solar panels. So you need things like oil and other fossil fuels if you're going to make solar panels most of the time. And things like, as Bruna noted earlier, if you're going to deal with any kind of renewable energy, it can be difficult to store that energy. As Dr. Samora notes, turbines are not all that efficient. Hydroelectric dams often can be a problem. They have caused problems in the past when it comes to damming up rivers. That's been debated before by many different people.
Time.
Can we have a minute?
Yes.
Oh, wait.
We're doing Sanders said,
Where y'all
We can like diversify like
Okay, so I'll take the first question since we've given answers.
Yeah.
So throughout the entire debate, we've talked a lot about how fossil fuel jobs pay more than renewable jobs pay. We still need an answer for how you guys are going to propose to make up for those salaries and protect those workers and protect those jobs.
Where is it? We actually had an answer for that. I'm so sorry, but it did get deleted. But essentially, we were saying that if we had diversified our economy earlier on and we created those jobs already, because we would have to build this solar panels and whatever ways we discovered new ways of renewable energy, and we would have had to make them better and more efficiently in order to effectively save our environment, and there would be jobs to produce those things as well as run them and as well as oversee them. All those jobs would have been produced and can still be produced because those renewable resources do still need to be advanced. They're very low level, we know this. That's why they don't work. That's why they will not be efficient enough to cover up fossil fuels, because fossil fuels have become so dominant in our society and in our economy. We will not be able to take over that. However, it's necessary for us to take that over in order to save our societies, in order to continue on. So those jobs would come from creating new renewable resources, continuing to do the ones we have, and making them, distributing them, using them, etc.
Wouldn't you say that our third contention kind of covers that in the sense that like we need to like use fossil fuels in order to like make that transition into a more sustainable economy? Because like if we do make that transition like overnight or like in like 5 years even, like our economy will crash because of how dependent it is upon fossil fuels, and that's why we can't regret it because we are dependent on it. Even though we're not arguing if like fossil fuels are good or bad, we're arguing if we can regret the dominance of the economy. And
we do regret it, and we're arguing that we regret it because it's so dominant, we have no future, because we will not be able to make a transition quick enough to save our future.
well, even in the
Because
past,
it's been dominant.
I just want to bring it, like, even in the past, you would have had to mine things like quartz if you were going to make solar panels. You would have had to have things like plastic in the past in order to.
But if we
to
couldn't
make
have an
advances in-
advanced society before fossil fuels were created, then how do you explain the ancient Greeks, or how do you explain Machu Picchu and cities like that, where they had
Did they have laptops?
entirely sustaining cities and development, and they had everything they needed, culture, there was music, everything you could ask for
But they
in a
couldn't-
society without destroying
But
their...
at the same time, they couldn't live past 60 years old.
Yes, they could.
No.
How-
Like, how many
we
people
have-
can live
there's-
past 60 years old beforehand?
How many
For one person to be able to live for more than 20 years, people had to get more than 10 children to be able to have one parent.
Okay, well, number one, yes, that's true. Also, they can live past 60 years old, but really, do we want to live past 60 years old in this
Also,
environment?
they were dying from diseases that fossil fuels have contributed to finding the cures for and contributed to finding the means for
And
administering.
And
vaccines.
again, this isn't about whether or not fossil fuels benefited us as a whole. It's about the fact that we've only focused on this for hundreds of years.
Maybe use our last minute, 30 seconds.
Okay, we're ready.
Is the house ready? House ready? How much is a human life worth to you? We are not denying that fossil fuels were used to get us to this point in our society. We are stating that the dominance of the fossil fuel economy causes the neglect of other outlets of energy and creation and this is what we regret, the dominance of the fossil fuel economy, not just the existence of fossil fuels. We as a society have known the negative effects of fossil fuels and consistently chose to ignore it. Per our evidence, the amount of money fossil fuels produced outweighed the negative effects towards the environment and human life, negative effects such as human displacement, scarcity of food and water in some areas, and ecosystem displacement. The current effects of climate change in the weather and rising temperatures and rising sea levels are causing more severe storms such as hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, etc. There's an impact on our food as climate change continues, and we will have less crops, weaker livestock and fisheries, and declining guaranteeing food security across North America and around the world. As droughts become more frequent and runoff is becoming more scarce, regions will rely heavily on irrigation, which will not be able to access, and they will not be able to access their waters, which will put more demand on groundwater sources which are already being stretched past their limits. Ecosystems are not being reconstructed quick enough and is suffering from high mortality rates due to the rising temperatures and drastic changes in their climates. These areas are not able to adapt before they are dying out. The Arctic and ocean are perfect examples of this. Across North America, cities are suffering from the effects of climate change through displacement and increase of natural disasters. Examples of this are areas with wildfires and floods. This not only affects the economy, but also the cultures of people who reside in these areas of disaster. Many indigenous people are closely connected with the resilience of the environment, to name one. As temperatures are continuing to rise, health risks will rise with them. People who suffer the most are going to be elderly, infants, and children, along with people in lower socioeconomic classes. Mortality and morbidity will increase as well, especially heat-related mortality and morbidity. In North America, the economy and supply chain infrastructure is going to be negatively impacted by the growing amount of climate hazards that are happening across the country and the globe. It is projected that these impacts will cause both market and non-market damages across North America and around the world. Policies were not adjusted to make sufficient changes to regulate our economy and fossil fuels with other sustainable options. As we all know, the economy directly affects our daily lives, an example being the rise and fall of gas prices recently. But our environmental and cultural surroundings also affect our everyday. For example, if a hypothetical, unprecedented winter storm knocks out your power and ices over your roads, we will not be able to go to work. Therefore, you won't be able to make money, so it doesn't really matter if you have a job, because you're not going to make your bills anyway. Why should we wish, though, there was more diversity in our economy? If we as a society are holding our past cultural injustices accountable, as in we regret society atrocities, for